What is an idea? It is a ghost, a fleeting spark in the intricate network of the mind. It is the most powerful and the most fragile thing in the universe. An idea can build a city, found a religion, or unravel the secrets of the cosmos. But left alone, inside the mind that conceived it, it is also mortal. When the thinker dies, the idea dies with them. For an idea to become immortal, for it to outlive its creator and change the world, it needs a body, it needs a vessel. It needs to be captured, anchored to the physical world, so it can travel across space and, more importantly, across time. This is the story of that body, a story of the long, arduous, and often frustrating quest to find the perfect vessel for thought. We live today in a world where ideas flow like water. They are weightless, instantaneous, transmitted around the globe in the blink of an eye. But for almost all of human history, this was not the case. For millennia, ideas were heavy, they were cumbersome, they were rare and incredibly precious, precisely because the bodies they inhabited were so difficult to create and so difficult to move. Tonight, we journey back to that world, a world before paper, a world where knowledge was literally weighed in stone, carved in clay, and stitched into the skins of animals. And by understanding the profound weight of knowledge in the past, we will come to appreciate the astonishing lightness of our present. This is the story of the written world. Our quest for a vessel begins where civilization itself began, in the sun-baked plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Mesopotamia. The Sumerians, a people of remarkable ingenuity, were the first to face a truly modern problem: information overload. As their cities grew into complex hubs of agriculture, trade, and religion, their memories could no longer hold all the necessary data. How many sheep were in the temple flock? How much barley was paid in taxes? What were the terms of a marriage contract? An idea needed a body, and the body they chose was the very earth beneath their feet, clay. Let us enter the world of a Sumerian scribe some 5,000 years ago. He is not a poet or a philosopher in our sense. He is an accountant, an administrator, a vital cog in the machinery of the state. His tool is not a pen, but a stylus, carved from a reed plucked from the riverbank, its end shaped into a sharp wedge. His canvas is not a sheet of paper, but a tablet of wet, pliable clay, shaped like a small pillow. Imagine him at work. He holds the damp tablet in one hand. With the other, he presses the wedge-shaped tip of the stylus into the soft clay. He does not draw curves. The medium does not allow for it. He makes impressions, short, straight, triangular marks. By combining these marks in different patterns, he creates the world's first true system of writing, cuneiform, which simply means wedge-shaped. Each mark is a piece of data, a number, a name, a quantity of grain. When the tablet is filled, it is left in the sun to bake, or fired in a kiln for greater permanence. The result is a remarkable object, A baked clay tablet is, in many ways, the most durable information storage medium ever invented. It is fireproof, it is waterproof, it does not rot or decay. The libraries of Mesopotamia, like the great library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, containing tens of thousands of these tablets, have survived for millennia, buried under the rubble of fallen cities, preserving for us the intimate details of their civilization. We know their laws, their myths, their business dealings, even their student complaints, all because of the permanence of baked clay. But this permanence came at a staggering cost, weight and bulk. Imagine a story, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Today, you can hold it in a single paperback book. In ancient Sumer, it would have required a dozen or more heavy, fragile clay tablets. A single book was a heavy, awkward stack of what were essentially ceramic tiles. A library was not a room of shelves, but a warehouse of crates. Transporting a significant amount of information was a logistical nightmare, requiring wagons and immense labor. Knowledge was not portable. It was architectural. It was anchored to a place. An idea, once given a body of clay, became heavy, sedentary, and profoundly difficult to share. It was a perfect system for accountants, but a terrible one for apostles or revolutionaries. As we travel west, up the Nile, to the kingdom of the pharaohs, we find a different solution, born from a different environment. Egypt was a civilization defined not by mud, but by the great, life-giving river. And from that river, they harvested a miraculous plant, papyrus. Imagine a stand of papyrus reeds, growing tall and green in the shallow waters of the Nile Delta. To the Egyptians, this plant was a gift from the gods, a symbol of life and growth, and from it, they created a writing surface that would dominate the Mediterranean world for 3,000 years. Let us witness the process. A worker wades into the water and cuts the thick, triangular stalks. The outer green rind is stripped away, revealing a pithy, white interior. This pith is then sliced into thin, ribbon-like strips. These strips are laid side by side on a hard, wet surface, their edges slightly overlapping. A second layer of strips is then placed on top at a right angle to the first, creating a cross-hatched pattern. This double-layered sheet is then covered with a cloth and pounded with a wooden mallet. The pounding crushes the plant's fibers, releasing a natural, starchy glue that bonds the two layers together into a single, cohesive sheet. The sheet is then pressed under a heavy weight to squeeze out the excess water, and finally left to dry in the hot Egyptian sunday. The result, after being polished smooth with a stone or a piece of ivory, is a sheet of papyrus. It was a revolutionary material. Compared to a clay tablet, it was astonishingly light, flexible, and portable. Multiple sheets could be glued together, end to end, to create a long scroll. A scribe could now write a continuous, flowing text, unburdened by the need to switch tablets. The Epic of Gilgamesh, which was a crate of tiles in Sumer, could be a single, easily held scroll in Alexandria. knowledge had learned to fly. The great library of Alexandria, the intellectual heart of the ancient world, was a library of scrolls, hundreds of thousands of them, containing the accumulated wisdom of the Greeks, the Egyptians, and the entire Mediterranean basin. Scholars could now easily access and compare texts. Ideas could be copied and sent across the sea, spreading with a speed and ease that was previously unimaginable. The scroll was the perfect vessel for the long, linear narratives of philosophy, history, and literature. But this elegant solution had its own fatal flaw: fragility. Papyrus is an organic material. It is vulnerable. It thrives in the dry climate of Egypt, its birthplace, but in the damp, humid conditions of Europe, it is a feast for mold, mildew, and insects. It becomes brittle with age, crumbling to dust at a careless touch. The great library of Alexandria and countless others like it have vanished. Their contents have not been lost to a single great fire, as legend would have it, but to a slow, silent, inexorable process of decay. The vast majority of the literature and science of the ancient world has been lost to us precisely because the body it was written on was so tragically mortal. Knowledge had become light, but in doing so, it had become ephemeral, a ghost in a body that was destined to fade. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, another great civilization was wrestling with the same fundamental problem. In China, a vast bureaucratic empire was taking shape, one that required a robust system for keeping records. Their earliest solution was as ingenious as it was cumbersome. It was born from the forests that covered much of their land, bamboo. Imagine a scholar in the court of the Qin dynasty. He is reading a book. It is not a scroll. It is a heavy, unwieldy bundle of thin, vertical strips of bamboo. The process of creating this book was laborious. A stalk of bamboo was cut, and the green outer skin was scraped off. It was then heated over a fire, a process called sweating, which drove out the moisture and oils that would attract insects. The stalk was then split into narrow strips, each just wide enough for a single column of characters. A scribe would then take a brush made from animal hair and ink, made from soot and glue, and paint the elegant Chinese characters from top to bottom onto these bamboo strips. When a strip was full, he would take another. Once the entire text was written, holes would be drilled at the top and bottom of each strip, and they were all bound together with a cord of silk or leather. To read it, the scholar had to unroll the heavy, clattering bundle. To roll it back up for storage was an equally awkward task. The system worked. It was durable, and the materials were abundant. The great philosophical works of Confucius and Laozi were first recorded on these bamboo slips. But the limitations were obvious. A famous story tells of one emperor who had to review over 120 pounds of bamboo documents every single day. Knowledge was not just heavy, it was a physical burden on the ruler himself. The famous expression, "history is rich in 5 carts," refers to the fact that the writings of one scholar would literally fill 5 ox carts when transported. The Chinese had another, more elegant, alternative, silk. As we have seen, silk was the ultimate luxury, a fabric of near mythical quality. It could also be used as a writing surface. It was incredibly light, smooth, and absorbed ink beautifully. The finest calligraphy and the most important works of art were created on scrolls of silk. But silk was astronomically expensive. Using it for everyday government documents or scholarly notes would be like writing a grocery list on a banknote. It was a medium for masterpieces, not for memoranda. The Chinese Empire found itself in a frustrating position. It had 2 choices for a vessel for its ideas. One was cheap, durable, but absurdly heavy and awkward. The other was light, beautiful, but impossibly expensive. They needed a third way, a material that combined the affordability of bamboo with the lightness of silk, and it was this practical bureaucratic need that would lead to one of the most significant inventions in human history. As the papyrus scroll proved its fragility in Europe, and as the supply from Egypt became unreliable due to political turmoil, a different solution gained prominence in the West. It was a solution born not from a plant, but from an animal: parchment. Parchment is not paper. It is the specially prepared skin of an animal, usually a sheep, a calf, or a goat. The process of creating it was a smelly, labor-intensive, and highly skilled craft. An animal skin would be soaked in a lime water solution for days to loosen the hair and fat. It was then stretched tightly on a large wooden frame. A craftsman with a special, crescent-shaped knife would then painstakingly scrape away every last trace of hair from one side and flesh from the other. The skin would be scraped, wetted, and stretched over and over again until it became a thin, strong, and remarkably smooth and durable writing surface. The finest quality of parchment, made from the skin of newborn calves, was called vellum. It was almost white, with a creamy, velvety texture. Parchment had enormous advantages over papyrus. It was far more durable and less susceptible to damp. It could be made anywhere there were animals, freeing Europe from its reliance on a single plant from Egypt. And most importantly, its structure was different. It was tough. Both sides could be written on, and it could be folded. This last quality led to a monumental shift in the form of the book. Instead of being glued into a long, awkward scroll, large sheets of parchment could be folded, cut, and then stitched together along one edge. This created the codex, the direct ancestor of the modern book, with individual pages that could be easily turned. The codex was a revolution in information access. A reader could now instantly jump to any section of a text, add bookmarks, or compare passages from different pages. It was a random access device, a stark contrast to the linear, sequential access nature of the scroll. The great Bibles and scholarly works of the Middle Ages were all written on parchment codices. But parchment for all its strengths, had one colossal, insurmountable drawback: its cost. A single, large Bible could require the skins of over 200 sheep. A small library represented a vast fortune in livestock. The sheer expense of the material meant that knowledge was once again an elite commodity. Books were rare, precious objects, often chained to desks in monasteries to prevent theft. The act of creating a book was a massive investment of both labor and capital. The world of ideas in the West was trapped. It had a durable, user-friendly body for its knowledge, but it was a body so expensive that only the wealthiest institutions could afford it. A great and growing thirst for knowledge was emerging with the rise of the first universities, but this thirst could not be quenched. The vessel was simply too precious. The stage was set. The need was desperate. The world was waiting for a new material, a material with the lightness of papyrus, the durability and practicality of parchment, but the affordability of, well, of almost nothing, of rags, of old rope, of the discarded refuse of civilization itself. The need for a new vessel for knowledge was a quiet, desperate ache felt across the entire civilized world. But nowhere was this ache more acute, more systematically understood than in the vast, sophisticated, and sprawling bureaucracy of Han Dynasty China. Let us step into this world around the 2nd century AD. The Han Dynasty was the golden age of ancient China, a period of relative peace, immense prosperity, and unprecedented territorial expansion. It was an empire that rivaled Rome in its scale and complexity. And to manage such an empire, one needs more than just armies and emperors. One needs information, rivers of it. Imagine the daily flow of documents into the imperial capital, Chang'an. Reports from provincial governors on the state of the harvest. Tax receipts calculated on the output of millions of peasant farmers. Detailed military dispatches from garrisons along the Great Wall. Census data counting every household in every district. Scholarly treatises on history, medicine, and astronomy. This was the lifeblood of the empire. An endless stream of written data that allowed the emperor and his court to see, to understand, and to control their vast domain. But as we have seen, this lifeblood flowed through flawed and cumbersome veins. The primary medium was bamboo. Picture a government archive in the capital. It is not a room of elegant scrolls, but a cavernous warehouse. The air is thick with the dry, dusty scent of bamboo. Along the walls, stacked from floor to ceiling, are thousands upon thousands of heavy, rolled-up bundles of bamboo slips. Each bundle is a single book or a single report. Finding a specific piece of information would require unrolling and re-rolling these clattering, awkward objects. It was a system that worked, but it was inefficient. It was slow, and it was incredibly space-consuming. The empire was, in a very real sense, drowning in its own paperwork. The alternative, silk, was a canvas for the sublime, not the mundane. Imagine the emperor himself wishing to commission a definitive history of his dynasty. For this, a work of immense prestige and permanence, his scribes would unroll a bolt of the finest, purest white silk. Their brushes would dance across its smooth surface, creating a work of art that was both text and treasure. But to use this same material for a routine tax ledger or a military supply request, it would be an act of absurd extravagance. The Han court was trapped in a paradox. Their civilization was producing ideas and information at a rate the world had never seen before. But their technology for recording those ideas was lagging far behind. The ghost of thought was growing ever larger, ever more complex, but the bodies it could inhabit were either too heavy to move or too expensive to create. The need for a new material was not just an intellectual curiosity, it was an urgent administrative necessity. The solution would not come from a great general or a famous philosopher. It would come from the quiet, observant world of the imperial court itself, from a man who served the emperor in the most intimate of ways. History often attributes great inventions to a single, heroic figure. In the story of paper, that figure is Kai Lun. He was not a scholar in the traditional sense. He was a eunuch, a court official who served the Emperor He of Han. This position, while often looked down upon, gave him a unique perspective. He was at the very center of the imperial information machine. He would have witnessed firsthand the daily struggle with the cumbersome bamboo slips and the exorbitant cost of silk. He was a problem solver, a man known for his ingenuity and his dedication to improving the efficiency of the court. The official history of the Han dynasty, written centuries later, records the pivotal moment. In the year 105 AD, Kai Lun went before the emperor and presented his new invention. This was not a sudden, magical discovery. It was the culmination of a long process of experimentation and refinement. The Chinese had, for some time, been making a form of proto-paper from raw silk fibers, a byproduct of the silk-making process. But this was still, essentially, silk, and therefore expensive. Kai Lun's genius was in recognizing that the fundamental principle could be applied to much cheaper, more common materials. He was a master of repurposing, of seeing the potential in what others discarded. Let us imagine our way into his workshop, a place of quiet, messy, and revolutionary experimentation. The process he perfected was one of deconstruction and reconstruction. He began with a collection of the most humble, worthless materials imaginable. Old, discarded fishing nets, their fibers frayed and broken. Scraps of hemp rope, too worn for use on any ship. Rags of cloth, the cast-offs from a tailor's workshop. And, most importantly, the inner bark of the mulberry tree, the same tree whose leaves fed the silkworms. These were the things that civilization threw away. Kai Lun saw them not as trash, but as a source of untapped potential. He saw the one thing they all had in common. They were all made of cellulose fibers. His process, though refined over centuries, was elegantly simple in its concept. First, the materials were chopped into small pieces and boiled in a large vat with water and wood ash or lime. This simmering alkaline bath would continue for hours, a chemical process that broke down the raw materials, separating the complex plant matter and leaving behind a slurry of pure individual cellulose fibers. This fibrous pulp, now a soft, mushy, oatmeal-like substance, was then transferred to a stone mortar. Here, workers would pound it relentlessly with heavy wooden mallets. This was a crucial, physical step. The pounding would further break apart and fray the individual fibers, a process called fibrillation, which was essential for helping them bond together later. When the pulp reached the right consistency, it was poured into a large vat of clean water and stirred, creating a dilute, cloudy suspension of fibers, floating like ghosts in the water. Now came the most skillful and defining moment of the entire process. The papermaker would take his mold. This was a rectangular wooden frame, across which was stretched a fine screen, usually made of woven bamboo strips or silk cloth. He would dip this mold into the vat, and with a series of subtle, practiced movements, a gentle shake, a slight tilt, he would scoop up a thin, uniform layer of the fibrous pulp onto the screen. The water would drain through the fine mesh, leaving behind an intertwined, matted layer of cellulose fibers on the surface. The thickness of the final sheet of paper was determined entirely by the skill and judgment of the craftsman in this single, fluid motion. He would then carefully lift the mold from the vat. The newly formed, wet sheet of paper, fragile as a wet leaf, was then couched or transferred onto a felt cloth. Another felt cloth was placed on top, and the process was repeated, creating a stack of alternating wet paper and felt called a post. This post was then moved to a large press. Immense pressure was applied, squeezing out the majority of the water. Finally, the individual, damp sheets of paper were carefully peeled from the felt cloths and hung to dry, often on heated walls or in airy lofts. The result was a sheet of paper. It was light, it was flexible, it was incredibly cheap to produce from discarded materials, and its smooth, absorbent surface was a perfect canvas for the elegant brushstrokes of Chinese calligraphy. Kai Lun had not just invented a new writing surface. He had solved the emperor's great dilemma. He had created the perfect body for the idea. The emperor was, by all accounts, delighted with Kai Lun's invention. He was awarded with an aristocratic title and great wealth. The new material was officially adopted for use throughout the vast imperial bureaucracy. The revolution that followed was not a loud, violent one. It was a quiet, rustling revolution that spread through every corner of Chinese society. In the government archives, the heavy, clattering bundles of bamboo began to be replaced by neat stacks of paper documents. A single administrator could now carry in his hands an amount of information that would previously have required an ox cart. The speed and efficiency of the entire imperial machine were dramatically increased. Knowledge, now liberated from the tyranny of weight, began to spread with unprecedented speed. Scholars could now afford to have their own personal libraries. A single book, which on bamboo was a luxury, could now be copied onto paper and become accessible to a much wider audience of students and officials. This led to a flourishing of literature, history, and philosophy during the later Han and subsequent dynasties. The world's first printed book, the Diamond Sutra, produced in China in the 9th century, was printed on paper. The invention of movable type, also in China, was only practical because of the existence of a cheap, mass-producible medium to print on. Paper changed the very nature of art. While silk remained the medium for the most formal, high-status paintings, paper offered a new, more intimate canvas. It allowed for a greater degree of spontaneity and personal expression. The great tradition of Chinese landscape painting, with its emphasis on the spirit and the energy of the moment, was born on paper. It transformed commerce. Merchants could now keep detailed ledgers and issue promissory notes. In the Song dynasty, this led to the invention of the world's first paper money, a concept of abstract value that was revolutionary. But the most profound impact was in the spread of ideas. Buddhism, which had arrived in China from India, found in paper the perfect vehicle for its message. The intricate sutras and commentaries, which would have been impossibly cumbersome on bamboo, could be easily copied onto paper scrolls and distributed to monasteries across the empire. Paper became the silent missionary of a new faith. For nearly 600 years, this revolutionary technology was a uniquely Chinese phenomenon. Just as they had guarded the secret of silk, they guarded the secret of paper. It was a profound strategic advantage. While the scholars of the West were laboriously scraping animal skins to create a single, expensive book, the Chinese were producing libraries. It seemed as if this secret, too, might be held forever. But history is driven by conflict and collision, and on a dusty, remote riverbank in Central Asia, two great empires were about to clash. And in the aftermath of that battle, the secret of paper would finally be torn from its cradle and begin its long, slow journey to the rest of the world. While China was experiencing its quiet paper revolution, the rest of the world remained oblivious, still wrestling with the old, inefficient mediums. In India, scribes wrote on dried and treated palm leaves. They would inscribe the text with a sharp stylus, then rub ink into the scratches to make them visible. A book was a collection of these brittle leaves, stacked and bound together between two wooden boards. It was a functional system, but the leaves were fragile and did not survive well in the subcontinent's humid climate. In the West, the Roman Empire was in its final, chaotic centuries. The great papyrus trade from Egypt was sputtering, disrupted by war and instability. This forced a definitive shift to the only other viable alternative: parchment. The codex, the book of folded pages made from animal skin, became the standard. Let us enter a medieval European scriptorium, a monastery on a remote Irish island, or in the heart of Frankish Gaul. The room is cold, silent, except for the scratching of quills on parchment. Monks, their fingers stiff with cold, are hunched over their desks. The work is a form of prayer, a devotional act of preservation. They are creating masterpieces. The Book of Kells, the Lindisfarne Gospels. The pages are made of the finest vellum. The script is a work of breathtaking artistry. The illustrations, the illuminations, are decorated with gold leaf and crushed gemstones. These books are not just containers of information. They are holy relics. They are objects of immense beauty and incalculable value. A single Bible could take a team of scribes and artists years to complete, and would cost more than a small farm. This very preciousness, however, was also a prison. Because the material was so expensive, the books it formed were rare. Knowledge was not a flowing river, but a collection of isolated, deep wells, accessible only to a tiny, cloistered elite. The intellectual energy of the classical world, which had flowed so freely on cheap Egyptian papyrus, had now been captured and bound in these beautiful but static parchment cages. The contrast with the East was stark. Two entirely different worlds of information had developed in parallel. One, in China, where knowledge was becoming light, cheap, and abundant. The other, in Europe, where it was heavy, precious, and rare. The world was out of balance, but a single, pivotal encounter was about to occur. A clash of empires in a forgotten corner of the world, an event that would act as a key, unlocking the secret from its Chinese cage and setting it free. A battle that would ultimately prove to be far more significant for the ideas it released than for the territory it conquered. History does not always move in a slow, gradual drift. Sometimes it pivots on a single, violent moment. A single day in a single, remote place can alter the course of civilizations for 1,000 years to come. Our story now moves to one such pivot, a battle fought not for a great capital or a holy city, but for control of a dusty river valley in the heart of Central Asia, a place most people, then and now, have never heard of, the Talas River. To understand why this obscure clash was so momentous, we must first understand the two titans who were on a collision course. From the east came the Tang dynasty of China. This was a second golden age, a period when Chinese power, culture, and influence were at their absolute zenith. The Tang Empire was even larger and more cosmopolitan than the Han. Its capital, Chang'an, was the most populous and magnificent city on earth, a glittering terminus of the Silk Road filled with merchants, monks, and emissaries from across the known world. The Tang armies, confident and expansionist, were pushing relentlessly westward. They projected their power deep into Central Asia, along the network of oasis cities and trade routes, seeking to control the lucrative Silk Road at its source and subdue the nomadic tribes of the steppes. They were a continental superpower, secure in their technological and cultural superiority, and one of their most significant, yet unstated, advantages was paper. Their entire military and administrative machine ran on this light, efficient medium. From the west came a new, dynamic, and explosive force, the Abbasid Caliphate. Rising from a revolution that had overthrown the previous Umayyad dynasty, the Abbasids had established a new capital at the brand new, perfectly circular city of Baghdad. They were the leaders of a vast Islamic empire that stretched from Spain to the borders of India. This was the dawn of the Islamic Golden Age. The Abbasids were patrons of science, mathematics, and philosophy. They were actively gathering and translating the great works of the Greeks, the Persians, and the Indians. They were building a civilization founded on knowledge, and like the Tang, they too were expansionist, pushing their influence and their faith eastward into the same Central Asian heartland. For a time, these two great empires had expanded into a power vacuum, but by the middle of the 8th century, their spheres of influence had met. A confrontation was inevitable. The fertile valleys and strategic mountain passes of what is now Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan became the frontier, the fault line, between two of the world's most powerful civilizations. Great wars often begin with small sparks. The trigger for the Battle of Talas was a local squabble between two rival city-states in the Fergana Valley. The rulers of Fergana and their neighbors in Tashkent were vying for regional supremacy. The ruler of Fergana appealed for aid from his powerful patron to the east, the Tang Emperor. The Tang court responded decisively. The great general Gao Xianji, a brilliant commander of Korean descent who had led many successful campaigns in the region, was dispatched with a formidable army. His force consisted of around 30,000 men, a corps of elite Chinese soldiers supplemented by a large contingent of allied Karluk Turkic mercenaries. Gao Xianji marched his army over the treacherous Pamir Mountains, an incredible feat of logistics, and swiftly conquered Tashkent. He executed its ruler and plundered the city. This aggressive act sent shockwaves through the region. The son of the executed ruler of Tashkent fled west and appealed for help from the other great power in the region, the Abbasid Caliphate. The Abbasid governor of Samarkand, Ziyad ibn Salih, saw this as both a duty and an opportunity, a chance to halt the Tang expansion and assert Abbasid dominance. He gathered his own formidable army. The sources are varied, but it was a large professional force of Arab and Persian soldiers, the hardened veterans of the Caliphate's many wars. The two imperial armies, champions of two different worlds, began to march towards each other. They would meet in the valley of the Talas River in July of the year 751. The fate of Central Asia hung in the balance, but unknowingly, so did the fate of the written word. Imagine the scene. The valley floor is a dusty, sun-baked plain, the snow-capped peaks of the Tian Shan Mountains visible in the distance. The Talas River, a lifeline in this arid landscape, glints in the summer Sunday. On one side, the Tang army. Their core infantry is arrayed in disciplined blocks, their armor and spears gleaming. Their renowned cavalry, including their Karluk allies, are positioned on the flanks, their horses restless, They are a proud, professional army, confident after a string of victories. On the other side, the Abbasid force, the rhythmic chanting of Allahu Akbar might have risen from their ranks. Their Arab cavalry, some of the finest horsemen in the world, are a fearsome sight. Their Persian heavy infantry stand ready. They are an army fighting to defend their faith and their new frontier. For 5 days, the two great armies clashed. The battle was a brutal, swirling, and indecisive affair. The Tang forces, under the brilliant command of Gao Xianxi, held their own against the Abbasid onslaught. The elite Chinese infantry proved to be a formidable defensive wall. Their long spears and massed crossbow formations repelling charge after charge of the Arab cavalry. It was a bloody stalemate. Two of the world's most advanced military machines were grinding each other down under the relentless Central Asian Sunday. It seemed that the battle would be decided by sheer attrition, by which side would break first. The breaking point came on the 5th day, and it came not from the front, but from within. The Karluk Turks, the mercenaries fighting alongside the Chinese, made a fateful decision. We will never know their exact motivations. Perhaps they were bribed by the Abbasids. Perhaps they felt they had more in common with their fellow Turkic and Muslim peoples than with their distant Chinese employers. Perhaps they simply saw a chance to be on the winning side. In the heat of a decisive engagement, the Karluk cavalry, instead of protecting the Chinese flank as ordered, suddenly turned. They attacked the Tang army from the rear. Simultaneously, the Abbasid army launched an all-out frontal assault. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The Tang army, caught between the hammer of the Abbasid charge and the anvil of their treacherous allies, disintegrated. Their disciplined formations collapsed. Order dissolved into panic. It became a rout, a massacre. General Gao Xianxi barely managed to escape with a handful of his personal guard. Thousands of his elite soldiers were cut down as they tried to flee. Thousands more were taken prisoner. The Battle of Talas was over. The Abbasids were victorious. The westward expansion of the Tang dynasty had been decisively and permanently halted. Central Asia, for the next 1,000 years, would be part of the Islamic world. It was a battle that redrew the political map of a continent, but its most profound legacy was not the soldiers who died on the battlefield, but the craftsmen who were captured in its aftermath. Among the thousands of prisoners of war taken by the victorious Abbasid army was a small and at first unremarkable group of men. They were not soldiers. They were artisans, craftsmen who had accompanied the Tang army to provide for its many needs, and among these artisans were paper makers. To the Abbasid commanders, these were just more prisoners, but when their skills were discovered, their value suddenly skyrocketed. The Abbasid world, as we know, was a civilization obsessed with knowledge. They were still reliant on papyrus, which had to be imported at great expense from Egypt, and parchment, which was even more costly. They knew that the Chinese possessed some other mysterious writing material, but its secrets were unknown to them. Now, by the pure chance of war, They had not just captured the product, they had captured the producers. These Chinese prisoners of war were not executed or enslaved in the fields. They were treated as prized assets. They were escorted to the great city of Samarkand, a jewel of the Silk Road and a major administrative center of the Caliphate. And there, they were given a simple choice: teach us your craft, and you will be treated with honor. The secret that China had guarded for over 600 years was about to be willingly given up in exchange for life and liberty. In Samarkand, around the year 753, the first paper mill outside of China was established. The Chinese prisoners, under the watchful eyes of their new Abbasid masters, replicated the process they knew from their homeland. They used the abundant local resources flax and hemp to create their pulp. They constructed the vats, the molds, and the presses. The first sheets of Samarkand paper were produced. It was a moment as significant as the battle itself. The Abbasids were not just passive recipients of this new technology. They were brilliant innovators. They quickly recognized the potential and began to improve upon the Chinese methods. They introduced the use of water-powered trip hammers to pound the pulp, a major step towards industrializing the process. They developed new methods for sizing and finishing the paper, making its surface smoother and less absorbent, perfect for the flowing Arabic script. The secret was not just liberated, it was being perfected. A battle fought for a dusty valley had resulted in the greatest technology transfer of the medieval age. The ghost of the idea, which had been born in China, had been captured in the chaos of war, and it was about to be given a new body, a new life, and a new mission to fuel the golden age of a rival civilization. The consequences of this single event rippled outwards with astonishing speed. Samarkand became the first great center of paper production in the Islamic world, its high-quality paper becoming a famous export along the very Silk Road the battle had been fought to control. From Samarkand, the knowledge spread like wildfire throughout the Abbasid Empire. A new paper mill was established in the capital, Baghdad, in 794 under the patronage of the great Caliph Harun al-Rashid. From there, it traveled to Damascus, to Cairo, across North Africa, and eventually into Spain. The world of clay, papyrus, and parchment was about to be washed away by a tidal wave of this cheap, versatile, and revolutionary new material. The battle was over. The war for the mind of the world had just begun. The secret, once liberated at Talas, did not just spread, it exploded. It was a catalyst dropped into the fertile, intellectually hungry culture of the Abbasid Caliphate, and it ignited a golden age. Before the arrival of paper, the Islamic world, like Europe, was a world of parchment and papyrus. Knowledge was precious, but its vessels were expensive and limited. The great caliphs in Baghdad, patrons of a new era of learning, faced the same fundamental problem as the scholars in their monasteries: a great thirst for knowledge, but not enough cups to drink from. Paper changed everything. It was not just a minor improvement, it was a paradigm shift. Imagine a scholar in Baghdad in the early 9th century. Just a generation before, to copy a single book, perhaps a translated work of Aristotle or Euclid, he would have needed a flock of sheep for the parchment. The cost would have been prohibitive, the process slow. Now, he can go to the Suko al-Warakin, the papermaker's market, a new and bustling district in the city. Here, he can buy a stack of clean, white, smooth paper for a fraction of the cost. The economic barrier to the creation and dissemination of knowledge had been shattered. This single change unleashed a torrent of intellectual energy unlike anything the world had seen since the Library of Alexandria. The very act of writing was transformed. The flowing, cursive nature of the Arabic script, which could be awkward on the resistant surface of parchment, found its perfect partner in the smooth, absorbent surface of paper. Calligraphy, the art of beautiful writing, flourished, becoming the highest art form of the Islamic world. A well-written page was not just a container of information, it was a thing of beauty in itself. The availability of cheap paper fueled a massive translation movement centered in Baghdad's legendary Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. Scholars, sponsored by the Caliph, worked tirelessly to translate the great scientific, medical, and philosophical works of the Greeks, the Persians, and the Indians into Arabic. The works of Plato, Aristotle, Ptolemy, Galen knowledge that was being lost or forgotten in the fragmented West were here preserved, studied, and expanded upon. This entire monumental enterprise, the act of saving the wisdom of the ancient world for future generations, was only possible because of the vast quantities of paper flowing from the city's new mills. Paper became the savior of ancient thought. Two cities, more than any others, became synonymous with this new golden age of paper. Samarkand, the city where the secret was first revealed, became a legendary center of production. Its paper, made from the fine flax and hemp of the region, was considered the best in the world. It was a major export, a source of immense wealth, traded east and west along the very Silk Road that had brought the battle to its doorstep. Samarkand paper became the gold standard, a brand name synonymous with quality. But the intellectual and cultural heart of this new world was Baghdad. Under the Abbasids, Baghdad was not just a capital, it was a consciously designed center of global knowledge. It was the largest, wealthiest, and most intellectually vibrant city on earth. And it was a city built on paper. The entire vast bureaucracy of the Abbasid Empire, from tax collection to military administration, ran on paper. Scribes and clerks, the kutab, formed a powerful and respected professional class. But beyond the government, a true paper culture emerged. Bookshops proliferated. It is said that in the 10th century, the main street of Baghdad was lined with over 100 of them. These were not just places to buy books. They were intellectual centers, places where scholars would gather to debate, discuss, and exchange ideas. A writer could have his manuscript copied by professional scribes and, within days, see it for sale throughout the city. The concept of the author and a reading public was born here. And the libraries were magnificent. While a king in Europe might pride himself on a personal collection of a few dozen precious parchment codices, a wealthy merchant or vizier in Baghdad would have a private library containing thousands of paper books. The great public libraries, like that of the House of Wisdom, were said to contain hundreds of thousands of volumes. These were not locked-away collections, but active centers of learning, open to scholars from across the empire. Imagine walking into one of these libraries. The air is cool and quiet, a respite from the bustling city. The shelves are filled with books on every conceivable subject: astronomy with detailed star charts, medicine with clinical descriptions of diseases, mathematics, where the Indian concept of zero and the decimal system were being perfected, poetry, history, alchemy, and philosophy. This entire ecosystem of learning, the authors, the scribes, the bookshops, the libraries, the debates, was all supported, enabled, and accelerated by this single, humble material. Paper was the soil in which the Islamic Golden Age grew. It allowed for a level of intellectual cross-pollination and rapid development that was simply impossible in a world constrained by the skin of an animal. The abundance of paper did not just allow for the preservation of old knowledge, it actively fostered the creation of new knowledge. It changed the very way scholars thought and worked. Because paper was relatively cheap, it allowed for something that was a luxury on parchment: the rough draft. A mathematician like Al-Khwarizmi, the father of algebra, could work through complex equations, making mistakes, crossing them out, trying different approaches, all on inexpensive sheets of paper. This freedom to experiment, to be wrong, to refine one's thinking, is essential to the scientific process. It is a freedom that is stifled when every mark you make is on a piece of material that cost a small fortune. The development of algebra, the refinement of algorithms, the creation of trigonometry, all were facilitated by having a medium that encouraged intellectual risk-taking. In the field of medicine, physicians like Al-Razi could compile vast encyclopedias of clinical knowledge, drawing on Greek, Persian, and Indian sources, but adding their own detailed case studies and observations. These massive medical texts could then be copied and distributed to hospitals and centers of learning throughout the empire, standardizing medical education and spreading best practices. Paper allowed for the creation of detailed anatomical drawings and pharmaceutical recipes, making knowledge more visual and more practical. In astronomy, the great observatories of Baghdad and Samarkand produced vast quantities of data. Paper allowed for the creation of extensive astronomical tables, the Zij, which were far more accurate than their ancient predecessors. These tables were essential for navigation, for determining the times of prayer, and for the development of more sophisticated cosmological models. Even the art of the book itself was a driver of innovation. The demand for illustrated manuscripts led to advances in the production of pigments and inks. The intricate geometric designs and floral arabesques that adorned the pages of the Quran and scientific texts alike were a form of mathematical and artistic expression, a celebration of the beauty of knowledge itself. This was a world where an idea, born in the mind of a thinker in one corner of the empire, could be written down, copied, and be being debated by scholars 1,000 miles away in a matter of months. The Islamic world had become a great, interconnected brain, and paper was its neural network. For nearly 500 years, this vibrant, paper-fueled world of knowledge existed in stark contrast to the intellectual landscape of Western Europe. While a scholar in Cordoba, in Muslim-controlled Spain, could consult a library of 400,000 books, his Christian counterpart in a Parisian monastery might have access to only a few hundred, if he was lucky. Europeans knew of this intellectual brilliance. They looked to the Islamic world with a mixture of fear, awe, and envy. They imported Islamic scientific texts, translated from Arabic into Latin, which often arrived on the very paper they were written on. They were importing the fruits of the Golden Age, but they still lacked the soil in which it grew. They had the ideas, but not the cheap, abundant vessel that made those ideas flourish. The slow, almost reluctant adoption of paper in the West was the next crucial chapter. The knowledge of how to make it, not just how to use it, had to cross the final frontier. The intellectual balance of the world was about to shift again. The neural network that had so brilliantly illuminated the Islamic world was preparing to connect to a new continent, a continent that was just beginning to awaken from a long, dark slumber. The slow journey west had begun. The neural network of paper, which had so brilliantly connected the Islamic world, did not halt abruptly at a hard border. It seeped, slowly and patiently, into the consciousness of Europe through its points of closest contact. And for centuries, the most intimate, vibrant, and often violent point of contact between the Christian and Islamic worlds was the Iberian Peninsula, Spain. By the 10th and 11th centuries, Al-Andalus, as Muslim-controlled Spain was known, was the most prosperous and intellectually advanced region in all of Europe. Its capital, Cordoba, was a beacon of civilization, a city of libraries, bathhouses, and paved, lighted streets at a time when London and Paris were little more than muddy, sprawling towns. The knowledge of papermaking had traveled with the expansion of Islam along the coast of North Africa and crossed the Strait of Gibraltar into Spain. The first paper mill in Europe was established in the city of Xàtiva, near Valencia, as early as the 11th century. Here, in the workshops of Muslim Spain, the same processes honed in Samarkand and Baghdad were put to work, creating high-quality paper that fueled the intellectual life of Al-Andalus. For the Christian kingdoms to the north, engaged in the slow, centuries-long process of the Reconquista, Al-Andalus was a source of both conflict and fascination. They saw it as enemy territory to be conquered, but also as a repository of a sophisticated culture and a forgotten knowledge that they craved. Christian scholars, like Gerard of Cremona, traveled to cities like Toledo after they were reconquered. There, working alongside Jewish and Muslim scholars, they embarked on a massive project of translation, rendering the great works of Arabic science and philosophy, works on medicine by Avicenna, on mathematics by Al-Khwarizmi, on philosophy by Averroes into Latin. And they discovered that the very medium these works were written on was a marvel in itself. This new material, which they called pergamino de pano, parchment of cloth, or simply paper, began to trickle north across the Pyrenees into the rest of Europe. It arrived first not as a raw material to be made, but as a finished product, an exotic import associated with the sophisticated and somewhat suspect world of the Moors. The initial reception of paper in Christian Europe was not one of enthusiastic adoption. It was met with deep suspicion, a cultural resistance rooted in centuries of tradition. For the European mind, particularly within the Church, the gold standard for any important document was parchment. Let us re-enter the world of a medieval monastery scriptorium. The monk here is not just a scribe. He is a guardian of tradition. The material he works with, parchment, is intrinsically linked to his worldview. It is made from the skin of an animal, a creature of God. The process of making it is long and arduous, a form of physical penance. The final product is tough, durable, and has a tangible, organic weight. It feels permanent. It feels worthy of carrying the sacred word of God. A parchment Bible was expected to last for 1,000 years. Now, into this world comes a sheet of paper. To the monk's eyes, it seems flimsy, almost ephemeral. It is thin, tears easily, and is vulnerable to damp. And its origins are deeply suspect. It is made from discarded rags, a humble, almost unclean material. And worse, it comes from the world of the infidels, the very people they were fighting in the Crusades. Paper was seen as a cheap pagan substitute for the noble Christian medium of parchment. In 1221, the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, a great patron of learning but also a traditionalist in this regard, issued a decree declaring all official documents written on paper to be invalid. They had to be recopied onto parchment to have legal standing. For centuries, a deep-seated prejudice existed. Parchment was for things that were meant to last forever. The Holy Bible, royal charters, legal deeds. Paper was for the transient, the disposable. A student's notes, a merchant's accounts, a rough draft. It was a clash of material cultures. The parchment wall was not just a matter of technology, but of deep-seated psychology and faith. Knowledge in the medieval West was meant to be heavy. It was meant to feel eternal. While the church and the royal courts clung to tradition, a new, pragmatic force was rising in Europe, a force that cared less for tradition and more for profit and efficiency. The merchant class. The key to paper's eventual acceptance in Europe was not a king or a pope, but the savvy, seafaring merchants of the Italian city-states. Italy, like Spain, had direct and constant contact with the Islamic world through its vast trade networks. Italian merchants in the Levant and North Africa saw the utility of paper firsthand. It was the language of commerce in the East. They began to import it in vast quantities, not for writing Bibles, but for the practical, day-to-day needs of their burgeoning commercial empires. Imagine a merchant in Venice or Genoa. He needs to record transactions, issue letters of credit, keep detailed ledgers. To do this on parchment would be absurdly expensive and wasteful. Paper was the perfect solution. It was cheap enough to be used for the mundane, everyday flow of business. These Italian merchants, particularly in the town of Fabriano, were not content to simply import paper. Like the Venetians with glass, they wanted to control its production. Sometime in the late 13th century, drawing on the knowledge acquired through their trade links, the Italians established their own paper mills, and, characteristically, they made significant innovations. They improved the pulping process by using water-powered trip hammers more effectively. They developed a new method for sizing the paper, coating it to make it less absorbent and prevent ink from feathering. Instead of using starch, as was common in the Arab world, they used animal gelatin. This new sizing made the paper stronger and better suited for the sharp, scratching action of a European quill pen, as opposed to the soft brush used in the East. And most famously, they invented the watermark. By weaving a small piece of bent wire, perhaps in the shape of a cross or an animal, into the mesh of the paper mold, they created a subtle, translucent emblem that was permanently embedded in the structure of the finished sheet. The watermark was a trademark, a guarantee of quality, and a powerful tool against counterfeiting. To this day, the watermark remains a symbol of authenticity. Italian paper, with its superior quality, began to dominate the European market. The journey of paper into the heart of Europe was now being led not by scholars or crusaders, but by merchants and craftsmen. Even as the merchants created the supply, a new, powerful source of demand was emerging that would finally break down the parchment wall for good. The rise of the university. Beginning in the 12th and 13th centuries, great centers of learning began to coalesce in cities like Bologna, Paris, Oxford, and Cambridge. These were new institutions, different from the old monastery schools. They were communities of scholars and students drawn together by a fervent desire to learn, to debate, and to push the boundaries of knowledge. This new academic environment created a knowledge explosion. The demand for books, textbooks on law, medicine, theology, and philosophy skyrocketed. The old system of manuscript production, where a single monk in a scriptorium might take a year to copy one book onto expensive parchment, was simply incapable of meeting this new demand. A new system, the Pesha system, emerged around the universities. A certified master copy of a textbook would be kept by the university. It was left unbound as a collection of loose sections, or Pesha. A student wanting a copy could rent one section at a time, take it to a commercial scribe, or copy it himself, and then return it. This allowed multiple copies of a single book to be made simultaneously. But even this was not enough. The sheer cost of parchment remained the great bottleneck. Paper was the only possible answer. Students, who could never afford a parchment book, could now buy cheaper paper copies of their texts. They could take notes in lectures, write essays, and build their own small personal libraries. The university became the beachhead from which paper launched its final, successful invasion of European culture. The prejudice against it began to fade in the face of overwhelming practical necessity. The demand from this new, literate class of students, lawyers, doctors, and clerks was simply too great. Parchment remained the medium for luxury and the law for centuries more, but the intellectual life of Europe had decisively shifted. Its new home was on paper. The stage was now perfectly set. A cheap, abundant, and widely accepted medium for recording information was in place. A new, growing, and literate public, centered around the universities and the cities, was hungry for more and more books. The intellectual and economic conditions were ripe for a revolution. All that was missing was a mechanism, a way to bridge the gap between the single, handwritten copy and the thousands of identical copies the world was now ready for. The world had its vessel. It was waiting for its engine. It was waiting for a perfect partner, a machine that would combine ink, metal, and paper in a way that would unleash the greatest information explosion in human history. The world was waiting for its engine. By the dawn of the 15th century, all the necessary ingredients for an information revolution were in place, simmering in the cultural crucible of late medieval Europe. The thirst for knowledge, ignited by the new universities, had created a vast and hungry reading public. And paper, the light, affordable vessel for ideas, had finally triumphed over the heavy, expensive tradition of parchment. Paper mills, driven by the water wheels of Europe's rivers, were now churning out an ever-increasing supply of this revolutionary material. The world had an unprecedented capacity to produce a medium for text and an unprecedented demand for the text itself. But a single, immense bottleneck remained, choking the flow of information: the human hand. Let us return, one last time, to the world of the scribe. He is no longer a monk in a silent monastery. He may be a professional working in a bustling urban workshop, part of the Pesha system, catering to university students. But his fundamental task remains unchanged. It is an act of painstaking, linear, and error-prone manual labor. Imagine him copying a book. He dips his quill into the ink pot, writes a few words, dips again, His eyes dart back and forth from the master copy to his own. A moment's inattention can lead to a skipped line, a misspelled word. To produce a single complete copy of the Bible could still take a skilled scribe more than a year of dedicated work. It was a monumental undertaking. This was the great paradox of the age. Ideas were beginning to circulate with a new energy, but the technology to reproduce them was still stuck in the ancient world. Knowledge could now be written on a material that was cheap and light, but the act of writing itself remained slow and expensive. Every single book in existence was a unique, handmade object. The concept of two truly identical copies of a book simply did not exist. The world was like a giant, pressurized vessel. The pressure of demand was building, but the outlet was infinitesimally small. It was ready to burst. What was needed was a way to mechanize the word, a way to move from the slow, artisanal craft of the single scribe to the rapid, industrial production of 1,000 identical texts. The perfect partner for paper was not a person. It had to be a machine. The man who would build this machine was not a scholar or a scribe. He was a craftsman, a metallurgist, a man who understood the properties of metal with an intimate, hands-on knowledge. His name was Johannes Gutenberg, from the German city of Mainz. Gutenberg was a man of ambition, of vision, and, it seems, of constant financial trouble. He spent years engaged in a secret project, borrowing heavily from investors, always promising a revolutionary new process that would make them all rich. His genius was not in inventing a single new thing from scratch. The core ideas he worked with had existed for centuries. The wine press, a common machine used in his native Rhine Valley to squeeze grapes, provided the model for applying immense, even pressure. The concept of printing, using a carved block of wood to stamp an image or a short text onto a surface, had been known in Europe for some time and had been used in China for centuries. But woodblock printing was laborious for long texts. An entire page had to be carved in reverse, and the block would wear out or crack. The true, world-changing innovation of Gutenberg was in breaking the page down into its smallest constituent parts. The individual letters, movable type. Let us enter his secret workshop in Mainz, around the year 1450. The heart of his invention is a small handheld mold. Into this mold, he places a matrix, a tiny copper block into which the shape of a single letter, say the letter A, has been punched in reverse. He then pours a molten alloy of lead, tin, and antimony into the mold. This alloy is his own special recipe, designed to cool quickly without contracting, creating a crisp, durable piece of type. He opens the mold, and a single, perfect, silver-gray letter A falls out, precisely the same height as every other letter he will cast. He repeats this process over and over, creating hundreds, thousands of individual, identical, and reusable pieces of type for every letter of the alphabet, every number, every piece of punctuation. This was the breakthrough. He had created a system for mass-producing the building blocks of language. Now, the work of the typesetter begins. Standing before a case with many small compartments, each holding a different letter, he picks out the type piece by piece and arranges them on a composing stick to form words, then lines of text. The lines are then locked into a large frame called a forme, creating a complete, solid page of metal text. This forme is then inked. A sheet of damp paper is laid on top. The entire assembly is slid under the great wooden screw of the modified wine press. A worker pulls the heavy lever. The press descends, exerting tons of pressure, transferring the ink from the metal type to the paper in a single, clean, and perfect impression. The lever is released. The sheet is peeled back. A printed page is born. The beauty of the system was its efficiency and reusability. While a scribe was still working on his first page, Gutenberg's press could have already produced hundreds of identical copies. And once the print run for that page was finished, the forme could be unlocked, and the individual pieces of type could be cleaned and redistributed back into the case, ready to be reassembled to form a new page. It was a system that combined the precision of metalworking with the efficiency of mass production. It was the perfect partner paper had been waiting for. To showcase the power and the beauty of his new invention, Gutenberg chose a project of immense ambition. He would print the most important and the most challenging book in the Western world, the Latin Vulgate Bible. The Gutenberg Bible, as it came to be known, was a masterpiece of both technology and art. It was not a cheap, flimsy product. Gutenberg was determined to prove that his machine could not only match, but exceed the quality of the finest handwritten manuscripts. He used the highest quality Italian paper. He developed a new oil-based ink that was blacker and more vibrant than the water-based inks of the scribes. His typeface, a beautiful Gothic script called textura, was designed to mimic the elegant handwriting of the best German scribes. He even left spaces in the printed text for illuminators to later add, by hand, the large, colorful decorated capitals and marginal illustrations, thus seamlessly blending the new technology with the old artistic traditions. The result, when the first copies were completed around 1455, was breathtaking. It was a book of stunning clarity, consistency, and beauty. Every one of the roughly 180 copies produced was, for the first time in history, textually identical. It was an instant sensation. The copies that were sent to the Frankfurt Book Fair were sold out before they even arrived. It proved, beyond any doubt, the viability and superiority of the new technology. The revolution that followed was not a slow creep. It was an explosion. The technology of the printing press could not be kept secret. Within a decade, presses had been established in other German cities. Within 3 decades, they were operating in Italy, France, Spain, England, and across Europe. The numbers are staggering. It is estimated that in the 50 years before the invention of the press, all the scribes in Europe produced around 20,000 books. In the 50 years after the invention of the press, from 1,450 to 1,500, it is estimated that the new printing presses of Europe produced somewhere between 8 and 20 million books. This period is known as the Age of Incunabula. The cost of a book plummeted. Knowledge, for the first time, became a mass-market commodity. A scholar could now own a personal library that would have been the envy of a medieval king. A middle-class merchant could afford to buy a book. The floodgates had opened. This sudden, massive, and uncontrolled dissemination of information had consequences that no one, not even Gutenberg, could have foreseen. It destabilized the old world and created the new. Its first great impact was the Protestant Reformation. In 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther wrote his 95 Theses challenging the practices of the Catholic Church. In a previous era, his ideas might have remained a local, academic dispute, but his supporters immediately took his writings to the printers. Tens of thousands of copies of his theses and subsequent pamphlets, printed cheaply on paper in the vernacular German language, were spread across Germany in a matter of weeks. For the first time, a revolutionary idea could go viral, bypassing the traditional authority of the Church and speaking directly to the people. The printing press became the engine of the Reformation, and the Church's monopoly on religious interpretation was shattered. Its second great impact was the scientific revolution. The printing press allowed scientists across Europe to share their findings with unprecedented speed and accuracy. When Copernicus published his revolutionary theory that the Earth revolved around the sun, his book could be printed in hundreds of identical copies and sent to astronomers from Poland to Portugal. They were all, literally, on the same page. They could build upon each other's work, correct each other's errors, and collectively construct a new model of the universe. The precise, repeatable diagrams and mathematical formulas that printing allowed for were essential to this process. Science became a collaborative international conversation, a conversation held on the pages of printed paper books. The age of the scribe was over. The age of the author had begun. The perfect partnership of paper and movable type had done more than just make books cheaper. It had fundamentally rewired the brain of Europe. It had fostered individualism, spurred on revolutions, and laid the foundations for the modern, information-rich world. The humble, unassuming sheet of paper, born from the refuse of an ancient Chinese court, had finally found its ultimate destiny. It had become the engine of modernity. And now, we live in a world that is, in many ways, a direct consequence of this paper revolution. Our entire civilization, our laws, our literature, our science, is built upon a foundation of paper documents. And yet, we also live in an age that speaks of a paperless future. Our ideas are once again becoming ghosts, ghosts in the machine. They are transmitted as weightless, electronic impulses. their bodies made of pixels on a glass screen. We are, in a strange way, returning to a state of information immateriality. But even in this digital age, the legacy of paper is everywhere. The very language we use, bookmarks, folders, pages on the web, is a direct inheritance from the world of the paper codex. The journey of the written word, from the heavy clay of Sumer to the fleeting light of our screens, has been a long and arduous one. It has been a constant struggle between the immortal, weightless idea and the mortal, physical body it needs to survive. And for 2,000 years, the most successful, most revolutionary, and most world-changing of those bodies was a simple, humble sheet of paper. Our long journey through the written world is now complete. We have felt the weight of clay, the fragility of papyrus, and the astonishing lightness of an invention that gave wings to human thought. It is a story that reminds us how the most profound revolutions often begin not with the clash of swords, but with the quiet rustle of a turning page. Thank you for allowing us to share this story with you tonight. We are a small channel, driven by a passion for these quiet histories. If you've found a moment of peace or wonder with us, a simple asterisk like asterisk helps our stories find others who might be searching for the same. And to ensure you are with us on our next exploration, please consider subscribing ***. Every new traveler on this journey with us is deeply appreciated. But now, the time for stories is over. Let the weight of knowledge, of history, of the day itself, gently lift away. Let your mind become a clean, blank page, ready for the quiet poetry of dreams. There is nothing left to learn, nothing left to do, only to be still. May your rest be deep, and your dreams be filled with wonder. Sleep well,